You can take the converted garage, or you can leave the property entirely, my father said. Not even looking up from his phone, I stood in the doorway of the Nashville farmhouse I had spent 5 years restoring, watching my brother, Brandon, carry a neon Crypto Queen sign into my living room. His fiancée, Brianna, was already directing movers to take my vintage velvet sofa out to the curb. Brianna needs the image for her launch, Dad added, his voice flat. The main house is for closers, Alexandra. You'll be fine in the shed. Before we go deeper, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. The air in the garage smelled like old gasoline and damp concrete. I pulled my cashmere throw tighter around my shoulders, trying to stop the shivering, but the cold here wasn't just a temperature, it was a message. My father called this a converted accessory dwelling unit, but that was real estate speak for a storage shed with a single-pane window and a space heater that rattled like a dying engine. I sat on a folding chair next to the lawnmower, staring at the main house through the dusty glass. It glowed in the twilight, a warm, golden beacon of architectural perfection. It glowed because I had made it glow. 5 years ago, that farmhouse had been a rotting carcass. The roof was caving in, the foundation was cracked, and the local historical society had condemned it. My parents had bought it for the land value, intending to tear it down. I was the one who stopped them. I was the one who saw the bones of something magnificent underneath the water damage and the ivy. I made a deal with them. I would pay for the restoration. I would manage the contractors. I would design every square inch. In exchange, it would be my portfolio piece, my home base, and eventually, my inheritance. I opened my laptop, not to work, but to look at the spreadsheet that I knew by heart. $216,482. That was the number. That was the principal I had poured into that house. I hadn't just painted walls, I had replaced the entire electrical grid. I had sourced reclaimed heart pine for the floors to match the original 1890s construction. I had flown to Vermont to hand-pick the vintage brass hardware for the kitchen cabinets. Every beam, every fixture, every tile was a receipt with my name on it. I had worked 80-hour weeks designing generic office spaces for corporate clients just to fund the custom millwork in that dining room. And now, I was watching strangers eat in it. Through the window, I could see Brianna holding court at the head of the table. She was wearing a white silk dress that looked dangerously close to a bridal gown, gesturing wildly with a glass of red wine. My mother was laughing, leaning in to hear her, her face lit with a kind of adoration I hadn't seen directed at me in years. My father was refilling Brianna's glass, playing the role of the gracious host in a house he hadn't paid to fix. They were treating the farmhouse like a stage set for Brianna's life, completely erasing the architect who built it. To them, I wasn't a partner or an investor. I was just the help. I was the invisible hand that made the toilets flush and the lights turn on so they could play aristocracy. The disrespect was so absolute, so casual, that it didn't feel like a stab in the back. It felt like suffocation. I looked down at my hands, rough from sanding and painting, and realized for the first time that my sweat equity meant nothing to people who only valued the appearance of wealth, not the work required to build it. I wasn't just displaced. I was being erased from my own masterpiece. 3 nights later, I was granted an audience at the dinner table. Not as a family member, but as a seat filler. Brianna needed a full table to make her pitch look organic for the Instagram story she was live streaming. I sat at the far end, picking at a catered salad, while she stood at the head of the table like Steve Jobs in a silk blouse. She was pitching her startup, a company called Visionary Flow, which seemed to be a word salad of every tech buzzword trending on Twitter in the last 6 months. "We aren't just building a platform," Brianna said, her eyes wide and unblinking. "We are leveraging blockchain AI to disrupt the creator economy paradigm. It's about decentralized synergy. The pre-seed round is already oversubscribed." My parents sat there, nodding with their mouths slightly open, completely mesmerized. They didn't know what a blockchain was. They couldn't define decentralized synergy if their lives depended on it, but they knew what ambition looked like, or at least, what they thought it looked like. I made the mistake of speaking. What is the actual revenue model? I asked quietly. Is it a subscription service? Or transaction fees? The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Brandon slammed his fork down. God, Alexandra, you just don't get it, do you? You're so stuck in the old economy. This isn't about revenue models. It's about valuation. He sneered at me. A look of pure condescension. Stick to picking out throw pillows and paint swatches. Leave the disruption to the people who understand the future. My father chuckled. She's right, son. Alexandra is very good at making things pretty. But business is different. I looked down at my plate, and for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar sting of rejection. I felt a cold, mathematical clarity. I looked around the room, the hand-carved crown molding I had installed, the vintage sconces I had rewired, the very table they were leaning on, and I realized exactly what I had been doing for the last 5 years. I hadn't just been restoring a farmhouse. I had been trying to buy my parents' love. I had treated their affection like a renovation project. I thought if I stripped away the rot, reinforced the foundation, and made everything beautiful enough, they would finally look at me with the same pride they blindly gave to Brandon. I thought I could sweat equity my way into being their favorite child. It was the sunk cost fallacy in its purest, most devastating form. I had poured $216,000 into a hole, convinced that if I just invested a little more, the return would finally come. But looking at them now, fawning over a woman who was selling them vapor, I realized the ledger would never balance. They didn't value the work. They valued the illusion. Brianna turned her phone around to show us her investor dashboard. Look at this engagement, she beamed. These are top-tier angels. I glanced at the screen. The usernames flashing by weren't angel investors. They were generic handles like User759 and CryptoKing929. They were bots, automated scripts programmed to hype up a hollow shell. She wasn't building a company. She was building a trap. And my family, desperate to be seen as moguls, was walking right into it. I didn't say a word. I just took a sip of water and let the realization settle in my chest like a stone. I wasn't the investor here anymore. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, mixed in with a stack of wedding magazines Brianna had ordered. It was a standard envelope from the bank, addressed to my parents. But the return address wasn't for their checking account. It was the mortgage lending division. I shouldn't have opened it. Legally, it wasn't my mail. But morally, considering I had paid every single bill for that address for half a decade, I felt entitled to a peek. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out a single, crisp sheet of paper that ended my life as I knew it. It was a confirmation of a home equity line of credit. My parents had taken out a second mortgage on the farmhouse. The amount was staggering. $150,000. I stared at the appraisal figure listed at the bottom. The house had appraised for nearly triple what they bought it for. That valuation wasn't based on the land. It was based on the chef's kitchen with the Italian marble I had installed. It was based on the heated floors in the master bath. It was based on the custom library with the rolling ladder. They hadn't just taken out a loan. They had liquidated me. They had taken every drop of sweat, every late night, every dollar I had invested in the restoration, and they had cashed it out to hand to a con artist. I walked into the main house without knocking. My father was in the study, admiring a new ergonomic chair Brianna had ordered for him using my shipping account. I didn't throw a fit. Chaos is bad design, and I don't do clutter. I placed the letter on the desk with the precision of a final invoice. You mortgaged the house, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow, detached. Gary looked at the paper, then up at me, his expression shifting from surprise to defensiveness. We needed liquidity, Alexandra. Brianna's seed round has a minimum buy-in. We aren't going to miss the boat on this. That equity exists because of my money, I said. You are gambling my inheritance, my work, on a website that doesn't even exist. It is our house, he snapped, standing up. Our names are on the deed. You were helpful, yes, and we appreciate the decorating, But don't confuse your hobby with ownership. We are making an executive decision for this family. We are investing in the future billionaire, not the one picking out curtain rods. The cruelty was breathtaking. Decorating, I repeated. I rebuilt the foundation, Dad. And if you're going to bring this negative energy into Brianna's workspace, he continued, pointing a finger at me, then maybe the garage is too generous. Maybe you need to find somewhere else to live until you can learn to be a team player. We need support, Alexandra, not jealousy. He waited for me to cry. He waited for me to beg, to apologize, to promise to be better so I could keep my cold spot in the garage. But the tears didn't come. Instead, a switch flipped in my brain. The emotional breakers tripped, shutting down the hurt and leaving only a cold, humming current of logic. You're right, I said. It is your house. The structure belongs to you. I turned and walked out. I didn't go back to the garage to sulk. I went to my desk and pulled out a binder. It contained every receipt, every invoice, and every contract from the last 5 years. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for a specialized moving company I used for high-end commercial staging. This is Alexandra, I said when the dispatcher answered. I need a full crew for a destaging. Immediate priority. I need everything gone. Not just the furniture. I need the fixtures, the hardware, the treatments. If it isn't nailed to the studs, it goes. I hung up. They wanted the house. They could have the house. But they seemed to have forgotten that a house is just a box. I was the one who made it a home. And I was about to take my inventory back. The family left on Friday for a founder's retreat in Aspen, a trip funded entirely by the home equity loan. Brianna had insisted it was necessary for synergy building. As soon as their rented SUV disappeared down the driveway, I unlocked the main house. I didn't feel like a thief. I felt like a repo man. The moving crew arrived at 8 a.m. Eye sharp. They were professionals, used to clearing out commercial showrooms in hours. I stood in the foyer with my clipboard, directing traffic. Everything, I told the foreman. Start with the lighting. The first thing to go was the massive, hand-forged iron chandelier in the entryway. I had commissioned it from a local artisan for $4,000. As the crew lowered it, the space instantly felt colder, darker. It was just a hallway now. Next came the window treatments. Custom Belgian linen drapes, floor to ceiling, lined with blackout fabric. When they came down, the harsh Tennessee sun flooded in, exposing the dust motes and the scuff marks on the walls. The softness was gone. The acoustics of the room changed immediately, becoming tinny and echoey. We moved room by room. The imported marble island top in the kitchen wasn't glued. It was a floating install I'd designed for flexibility. We lifted it off, leaving the basic plywood subcounter exposed. The vintage brass hardware on the cabinets, every handle, every hinge was unscrewed and packed into velvet-lined boxes. Without them, the cabinets looked like what they were, generic builder-grade boxes I had painted myself. I stripped the bathrooms of the unlacquered brass faucets and the rainfall showerheads. I pulled up the hand-tufted wool runners from the stairs. I even unscrewed the custom switch plates. By noon, the house was unrecognizable. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a skeleton. It was a lesson in perception. My parents thought they were wealthy because they lived in a house that felt expensive, but they didn't understand that the feeling was an illusion I had curated. The architecture was just the canvas. I was the paint. Without my decorating, as my father called it, the farmhouse was just an old, drafty building with uneven floors and bad lighting. I stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by emptiness. The walls were bare, the floors were naked, the silence was absolute. It was terrifying how quickly a life could be dismantled, but it was also clarifying. Wealth whispers, I thought, remembering a phrase my mother loved to use. But standing there in the echo chamber I had created, I realized the truth. Wealth whispers, but debt screams. And without my aesthetic veil covering it up, this house was about to start screaming. I did a final sweep, checking every room. No staging rugs, no art, no soul. I locked the front door, leaving the key under the mat. My inventory was safe in a climate-controlled storage unit across town. I got into my car and drove away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what they would find when they returned. A mirror. A reflection of exactly what they brought to the table. Nothing. They returned on a Tuesday. I got the call from Brianna first. I didn't answer. Then Brandon. Then my mother. Finally, I answered my father's call because I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear the moment the illusion broke. "Alexandra!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Where is the kitchen? Where are the lights?" "They are in storage," I said calmly. "Under my name. You asked me to leave, so I took my belongings with me. I assumed you didn't want my decorating cluttering up your investment." "You stripped the house," he roared. "It's gutted. The appraiser is coming tomorrow. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I returned the house to its original condition before my involvement," I replied. "You said it was your house on the deed. I respected that. I only took what I paid for. Check the invoices. If I paid for it, it's gone. You have to bring it back." He was begging now. The anger replaced by sheer panic. The bank. They need to see the value. If it appraises low, they'll call the loan. We already spent the money. "Spent it?" I asked. "On what?" "On marketing. On the launch. Brianna said we needed to front-load the capital to generate buzz, and that was the moment the second shoe dropped. I hadn't just exposed the house. I had exposed the scam. The money from the second mortgage, the one leveraged against my equity, was already gone, burned on parties, influencers, and private jets for a company that didn't exist. "Well," I said, "it sounds like you made an executive decision. I'm sure Brianna's synergy will cover the difference." I hung up. 2 days later, the news broke. Not about the house, but about Brianna. A tech blog had done a deep dive into visionary flow after a tip from a suspicious vendor. It turned out Brianna wasn't a founder. She was a serial fraudster who had run similar schemes in Austin and Miami. The investors were fake. The technology was vaporware. And the money, my parents' money, was untraceable. The bank sent an appraiser to the farmhouse the next day. He walked through a dark, echoing shell with plywood counters and bare bulbs. He appraised it for exactly what it was, a structurally sound but unfinished shell in a rural area. The valuation came in at $300,000 less than the mortgage note. The bank froze the credit line immediately and demanded repayment. Brianna vanished. She didn't even pack. She just took her company laptop and left in the middle of the night, leaving Brandon with a maxed-out credit card and a lease on a leased BMW he couldn't afford. My parents were left standing in the wreckage. They had a house they couldn't live in, a debt they couldn't pay, and a son who was just as much a victim of his own ego as they were. They called me every day. They left voicemails ranging from rage to sobbing apologies. They begged me to bring the staging back, to fix it so they could sell it and cover the loan. But you can't stage a crime scene. And you can't renovate a betrayal. I listened to the messages, deleted them, and went back to work. I had a new project to start. The foreclosure auction was held on a Thursday morning on the courthouse steps. It was raining. A cold, persistent drizzle that matched the mood. I stood in the back of the small crowd, holding a black umbrella. I wasn't there to bid. I was there to witness. My parents were huddled together near the front, looking older than I had ever seen them. My mother was crying softly into a tissue. My father looked shell-shocked, staring at the auctioneer as if he were speaking a foreign language. Brandon wasn't there. He was dealing with his own financial ruin somewhere else. The bidding was fast and brutal. A local developer bought the farmhouse for pennies on the dollar. He didn't care about the history or the restoration. He just wanted the land. He planned to subdivide the lot and build condos. When the gavel fell, my mother let out a small, choked sob. My father put his arm around her, but his eyes found me in the crowd. He walked over, leaving my mother standing alone in the rain. "Alexandra," he said, his voice rough, "you could have stopped this. You have the money. You could have bought it back." "I could have," I agreed. But why would I buy a house I'm not allowed to live in? We would have let you stay, he said, and the desperation in his voice was painful to hear. We would have made it work. We're family. No, I said gently. You're a business partnership that made a bad investment, and I'm the creditor you defaulted on. I turned and walked away. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I just felt clean. The debt was paid. The ledger was closed. 6 months later, I opened the doors to my new design firm, Sanctuary Interiors. My studio was small, located in a renovated warehouse in East Nashville, but it was mine. The sign on the door was hand-painted in gold leaf. My first client was a woman named Sarah, a recent divorcee who had lost her home in the settlement and bought a small fixer-upper. She looked tired, overwhelmed, and scared. I don't have a huge budget, she said apologetically, looking around at my samples. I need a place where I can feel safe again, where I can feel like myself. I smiled at her, and for the first time in a long time, the smile reached my eyes. I understand completely, I said. Let's start with the foundation. We aren't just building a house, Sarah. We're building a fortress. I pulled out my sketchbook and started to draw. My revenge wasn't destruction. It was creation. I hadn't just survived the demolition of my old life. I had become the architect of a new one, and this time, I held the only key. If you've ever had to tear down your life to build something better, share your story in the comments. I read every single one.